Week 14 of the 2020 college football season is done, and we are headed into week 15 now, which is the second to last week of the regular season for college football. And this has been quite a week in college football, especially for week 14. We saw several crazy performances, lots of teams get upset. We also saw several really impactful performances. I mean, you saw Alabama and Clemson both have massive blowouts this past weekend, which is going to be great for both those teams. Same thing with Ohio State and Notre Dame. So all four of the top four teams right now are definitely looking like that they're on their own level in comparison to everyone else. So it looks like our four college football playoff teams are pretty definite right now, unless something crazy happens over the next couple of weeks. But this is going to be a very impactful week for a lot of teams. And as we always do, we're going over our updated rankings for week 15 of this college football season, starting out with 1 through 7. And 1 through 4 has not changed at all from last week to this week. We got Alabama still at number 1. They blew out LSU 55-17. So I mean, you can't take Alabama out of that position. I mean, that's a great win though for them. I mean, I'm sure that they're very motivated there, because I mean, considering LSU had a big win over them last season, Alabama probably had a bit of a chip on their shoulder going into that matchup. But it was a great win in the end. They were 9-0 now, and they are still undefeated heading into week 15, which is going to be once again a pretty big week for a lot of teams. Moving forward and determining who's going to be in the major bowl games and who's going to be in the college football playoff. Number 2, we got Notre Dame still, and they still remain ahead of Clemson because they beat them a few weeks back. But I think Notre Dame and Clemson are now completely clinched for the ACC championship. So we're going to see both those teams playing against each other for the second time this season in the ACC championship game, which that's going to be a huge game because, I mean, Trevor Lawrence is more than likely going to be back for Clemson in that matchup. Of course, Clemson did not have Trevor Lawrence when they played Notre Dame the first time, along with a few defensive players too. So Clemson really was pretty shorthanded in their first game against Notre Dame, but the second game, I personally think, could be a very different story. I think Clemson should be pretty favored in that matchup against Notre Dame for the rematch, mainly because, I mean, Clemson's going to probably have, unless COVID hits again, all their players back for the most part that have been extremely impactful for them all season long. So for Notre Dame, they're going to have a hell of a game if they're going to beat Clemson in that matchup. Number 3 is going to be Ohio State. They beat Michigan State 52-12 this past week, which is a huge win for them. I'm sure the Buckeyes are very motivated right now as well, considering, I mean, if Ohio State misses one more game for the rest of the season, that puts them out of the Big Ten championship. That makes them ineligible, which would be that'd be a really bad situation for them. That'll probably not come out of the college football playoff, because I don't see a team that's not the Big Ten champion making it to the college football playoff this season. So that's going to be crucial for Ohio State to make sure that they get all their games in. But at least they were able to play against Michigan State, and they definitely looked really good. So I think Ohio State should be in a pretty good position, but they're 5-0 right now. Definitely looking like a good team. 5 is going to be Texas A&M. They beat Auburn 31-20, being the final score there. That was a good win there for Texas A&M. I mean, it was pretty close for the majority of the time. But Auburn, of course, is a pretty decent team, even though they got 4 losses. So, I mean, that was a good win for Texas A&M there. They're 7-1. And something that you may have noticed, I finally, for some of you guys, swapped Florida and Texas A&M. Of course, both those teams I've kind of been back and forth on all season long. I've had Florida ahead of Texas A&M for several weeks now, and I've got Florida now at number 6. I finally moved Texas A&M up to number 5. I've had Florida ahead of Texas A&M for quite a while, mainly because, I mean, Florida's been the more dominant team all season long until this week. This week was a much bigger exception to that. I mean, Florida really did not look good this week against Tennessee. I mean, they got the win 31-19, but that was a sloppy win for Florida. They just did not look like themselves. I mean, considering Tennessee is a 2-6 team now, I mean, that was not a very good game there out of Florida for sure. So I think, I mean, if you look at both teams, Texas A&M did beat Florida earlier on in the season, and I have brought up that was almost 3 months ago. So you can't really compare that matchup to now. But I mean, if you think about it, like Texas A&M, I mean, it looks like they are playing better than Florida now, mainly because they had a much better win over Auburn this week than Florida did over Tennessee. I mean, Florida just did not look very good this past week. And I do understand both teams. Let me get something straight here. Both teams are extremely close there. Like, I could easily put Florida at 5 again this week, but Texas A&M is slightly the better team right now. So that's why I got Texas A&M at number 5. I mean, if you look at them, I mean, they got Kellen Mond, which I don't think Kellen Mond is as good of a quarterback as Kyle Trask is for Florida, but both teams are still very, very good. I mean, they're definitely on a different level in comparison to most teams, but I just think Texas A&M right now, I mean, I got to give them the upside there. They're going to be number 5 this week. But Florida's 8-1 as well, so they do have one more win than Texas A&M does. But so I'm going to give Texas A&M the advantage there over Florida as of now. Cincinnati's going to be number 7, And they did not play this week, but they're 8-0. They're going to stay at number 7 for now, mainly because they've been a very dominant team all season long. Moving on to 8 through 14, we got Miami at number 8 this week. They're moving up one spot after their shutout against Duke, and I considered possibly putting them at number 7 this week. I mean, that was a very impressive performance out of the Hurricanes this past week, as they're now 8-1. So that was a very good week win for Miami. Number 9 is going to be Indiana. They beat Wisconsin 14-6, being the final score there. And that was a good win out of the Hoosiers. I mean, only keeping Wisconsin to 6 points, that was very impressive. I mean, Northwestern kind of did the same thing last week or a couple of weeks ago, but still, I mean, for Indiana, I mean, yeah, that's a very impressive win out of them. I mean, Wisconsin's got a great offense. There's no doubt there. I mean, they were able to knock out their first 2 opponents pretty easily, and they scored a lot of points. But the past couple of games for Wisconsin have just been terrible. They've looked very slow, very sluggish. This offense does not look the same in comparison to how it was at the beginning of the season when they had their dominant performances. So for Indiana right now, Indiana's looking like a top 10 team once again. I think Indiana is still, I mean, just a great team. And they look good without Michael Penix. Let me remind you, Michael Penix is out for quarterback. It looks like for the rest of the season for Indiana. So that is a huge impact on the Hoosiers. But they looked really just fine against Wisconsin. So you got to watch out for them moving forward still as well. So Indiana is very still capable of a New Year's Six bowl game. They're 7-1. Iowa State's going to be number 10, and they had a big blowout win over West Virginia. They have now clinched an appearance in the Big 12 championship. They won that game 42-6 this week against West Virginia. They're 8-2 right now, so we do have a 2-loss team currently in the top 10, which is kind of crazy, but Iowa State is still, I think, a very talented team. Like, they've been looking very good all season long. I mean, they beat Oklahoma earlier on, so that's why Iowa State is still in front of Oklahoma. But I think Iowa State is still, I mean, Iowa State and Oklahoma, that's going to make for quite a match in the Big 12 championship because Iowa State beat them earlier on in the season, but Oklahoma is quite possibly the hottest team in the nation right now as they have won, I think, 6 straight now. They beat Baylor this week 27-14, and they're moving up 1. So, yeah, both teams are very, very hot in the nation right now, and I think both teams are definitely capable of a good New Year's Six bowl game. So watch out for that moving forward. But Georgia's going to be number 11. They're going to be right in between Iowa State and Oklahoma, and they are 6-2. They did not play this week. Coastal Carolina comes in at number 13 this week after beating BYU 22-17. That was a good win there out of Coastal Carolina. I mean, that's definitely the best win of the season for them. And considering it was only inches away from being a loss, you got to consider that too. Like, BYU was so close to winning that game, but in the end, Coastal Carolina played better. They scored more points. They got the win. So that was a good win out of them. And they're looking pretty good right now. I'm not going to put them in the top 10 quite yet. Like, I don't even think the College Football Playoff Committee is going to do that either. I think they'll probably sit at maybe 12 or 13 as well in the College Football Playoff rankings. Like, I think the AP polls them at number 11 this week, which I still think Coastal Carolina is not as good as Oklahoma, Georgia, or Iowa State yet. I think they're good, but they're not quite that good yet. So I'm going to give them a number 13 ranking, which is probably going to be pretty comfortable for them right now. 14 is going to be USC, and they have not played their game yet, that game's coming up today, Sunday night, and I decided that I want to get my rankings out here today, as we always do, because I usually release these on Sunday afternoon. So, I mean, that game has not gone down yet, but the AP poll released their poll, so I decided to do mine as well. But I think USC, they should win that game if everything goes right. So I'm going to keep them in the same position for now at number 14. They're 3-0 right now, and if they do get a win against Washington State, that heavily puts them as a favorite for winning the Pac-12 this season, as really they're only the Pac-12 team in the rankings right now. But yeah, for USC, I mean, if something goes wrong there and they take a loss, I'd probably bump them down to maybe number 20 or 21. One of those spots there. I think though USC, they should get a win if everything goes right, because USC is a pretty talented team this season. And I think all around USC is the better team. But once again, we'll have to see what happens. That game's coming up here in 3 hours from now. Moving on to 15 through 21. 15 is going to be Northwestern. They're 5-1, and they did not play this week. They had their game canceled, so we will not see them, or we did not see them this week. But next week, they've got a big matchup. Iowa's coming up at number 16. They beat Illinois 35-21. That was a good win for them. They're moving up 3, and they're 5-2. So Iowa's now won, I think, 4 in a row, if I'm right. That was a pretty good win out of Iowa there. I mean, Illinois has been kind of a sneaky team this season. I mean, they scored 21 on a pretty good Iowa defense. So that was a good game out of Illinois there. But for Iowa, Iowa was just a better team in the end. They got the win. BYU's coming in at 17 then after taking a loss to Coastal Carolina. That was a brutal loss for BYU. I mean, it was so close. Like, if you saw that final play there, they were like a foot away from getting a huge win there against Coastal Carolina, which probably would have bumped BYU up into the top 7. But In the end, BYU is going to stay at number 7, or they're going to go down to number 17 this week, so they're moving down 9 positions. They're 9-1. Louisiana is going to be number 18 this week. They beat Appalachian State 24-21. Good win there for Louisiana, and they're moving up 4. They're 9-1. Colorado's coming in at number 19 this week, which may come as a surprise to many of you, but Colorado, believe it or not, is 4-0 right now. This is a team that I think is for real. I mean, they beat Arizona 24-13. That was a great win there out of the Buffaloes. And I understand Arizona's not a very good team, but I mean, for Colorado to be 4-0, they've won 4 games in the Pac-12. Like, that was a pretty impressive game there out of Colorado right now. And I think this team is definitely worthy of possibly being a competitor to USC for the Pac-12 South spot in the championship. So watch out for that as well. But North Carolina's coming in number 20, which is kind of crazy to see a 3-loss team in the top 20. But here we are. North Carolina is going to be in this position here this week. They beat Western Carolina 49-9 this past week, and they're moving into the rankings once again this week. I think for the college football playoff rankings, it's kind of crazy to see the committee put them in the top. I think they were 17 this week, if I'm right. And that was a crazy spot for the committee to put them in because, I mean, considering once again, North Carolina is a 3-loss team, and the committee was putting North Carolina in front of teams that were still undefeated, like Colorado, or they also put them, I think, in front of Iowa last week. So you got to consider that too. But Colorado's looking pretty good right now. Watch out for them in the Pac-12. They're kind of a scary team. 21 is going to be Tulsa. They're coming in, or North Carolina. Yeah, but anyway, yeah, Tulsa's going to be number 21. They beat Navy 19-6 this past week. They're moving up 3 spots, and they are 6-1. So Tulsa's looking pretty good there as well. Moving on to 22 through 25, we got Texas coming in at 22 after their blowout win over Kansas State. I mean, I have no idea what happened to Kansas State these past few weeks, but they've looked absolutely horrible. I mean, they allowed nearly 70 points to a Texas team that's not really been all that good offensively all season. I mean, if you look at Texas, I mean, they got Sam Ehlinger, who's a great quarterback, but that's really about it. So for Texas to score nearly 70 on Kansas State like that was pretty embarrassing for the Wildcats. But Texas is 6-3. They're moving into the rankings this week. Same thing with Liberty. They're also moving in, but they did not play this week. However, they are 9-1, so they've got a pretty good record. Oklahoma State's moving down 8 spots this week after their loss to TCU, 29-22. It was the final score there. So Oklahoma State took a pretty terrible loss there to TCU. But in the end, I mean, Oklahoma State, I think, is still a pretty talented team, and they're definitely one loss away. If they do lose a game, yeah, Oklahoma State is going to be knocked out of the top 25. But, I mean, Oklahoma State, ever since Oklahoma has been on the rise, Oklahoma State's really fallen is something that I have noticed. I mean, the second half of the season has been pretty sloppy out of the Cowboys, but in the end, they're still going to be number 24 this week. I think they're pretty talented. They just have not been playing very well. Wisconsin's number 25, and this has been a big surprise to me. I mean, they started out 2-0, and they were looking pretty good, but they took a loss to Northwestern, and then they took a really bad loss to Indiana. So they're moving down 10 this week to number 25. They're barely hanging on there on the top 25, but they're 2-2. And I mean, yeah, Wisconsin really needs a win right now. Like they've really been struggling mainly because of COVID as well. Like this team has had to forfeit a lot of games because of COVID positives. And I mean, that definitely shows considering they've got 4 games in comparison to some teams in the Big Ten who've now got 6. So, I mean, yeah, for Wisconsin, it's pretty tough right now. But, I mean, in the end, I mean, for them to lose to Indiana like that is pretty unacceptable, especially considering Wisconsin still has got the majority of their team. Like, they've got a lot of talent there. They just have not been able to execute. But for the first 5 out right now, we got NC State at 26. And I really consider putting in NC State for this week as I think they're 8-3. So they're a pretty good team right now. 27 is going to be Buffalo. I think they're undefeated at 4-0, but they haven't had quite a big enough or quite a good enough strength of schedule to put them in the top 25 yet. Missouri's coming in at 28, Nevada's 29, and then San Jose State, kind of a surprise team there. They're still undefeated, is going to be at number 30. For the teams that dropped out this past week, Oregon took a loss. They were at 20 last week. Marshall, of course, was upset by Rice. They were at 21. And I was telling you guys, Marshall was not for real. I was telling you guys all season long, like everyone was overreacting, putting Marshall in the top 15. Like the AP poll at one point had them at like 14, and I was stunned by that. Like Marshall does not have a strong strength of schedule, and even though they were 7-0, I mean they were exposed big time by Rice. They got shut out by Rice, in fact. So, I mean, yeah, Marshall looked absolutely terrible this past week. They're dropping out, and Washington was number 23. They also got upset this past week. So the Pac-12 is really struggling right now. I mean, many people, including myself, kind of thought Oregon and Washington would be in the Pac-12 championship this season. Possibly even you could sneak California in there, California, Berkeley, but I mean, they just have not had a very good season. But I mean, yeah, the Pac-12 has been really weird. I mean, we could possibly see a Colorado team that was absolutely horrible last season in the Pac-12 championship if USC slips up tonight. So, I mean, yeah, it's a really crazy situation going down in the Pac-12 conference right now. Should be pretty fun to see what happens there as we head towards the end of the season. But in the end, that wraps up our rankings for week number 15. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below on this. And yeah, if you enjoyed these rankings, slap a like on this video, subscribe as well if you're not already yet, as it really helps to the channel. I'd really appreciate that. As always, thanks again for watching. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. Lots of previews coming this week, so stay tuned, and I will see you all later.